I wonder, Harvey, you said this and mentioned it, but if you could just reflect a little more on the sort of the theological narratives that lie behind this description that you're giving. So, for example, and you may see it differently, when I listen to a lot of people in churches of my racial group, they do talk about what I would describe as affinity. Come together to support and love and care for each other. And when they think of evangelism, they'll often say things like, if people knew how wonderful and warm and caring we were, they'd love to come and join us.
Yeah.
That's all affinity stuff. And there's a certain theological read around that.
Sure.
Whereas, and I don't want to romanticize, part of what you're saying is that what is drawing a community of God's people together of, let's say, African immigrants is a sense of God has called us here to this place to live a kingdom life. And in the illustration you gave, what might that look like? Talk a little bit more about the kind of theological imagination that's informing that perspective. Because the other one I get as I listen is this deep conviction that the Holy Spirit's actually doing something in neighborhoods. Anyway, talk about it.
Yeah. So let's start with the Spirit.
Yeah.
A lot of African Christianity is at the moment influenced by Spirit-centered reading of the Bible, a Spirit-centered understanding of the world. And that for Africans is coming from the culture that the general, the wider, even non-Christian culture is Spirit-centered. So when they become Christians, charismatic Christianity or enthusiastic Christianity makes sense to them.
Yeah.
And it helps them because the Spirit is ubiquitous already in their culture. The Spirit is already at work in outside Christianity. It helps them when they become Christians to begin to understand that the work of the Spirit of God now, not the Spirit they knew before they became Christians.
Yep.
The work of the Spirit now continues, and really our call as Christians is to discern what the Spirit is doing and join and be part of it. And they bring that understanding with them when they come abroad, when they come to Britain, when they come to North America. They are still believing that most of them would actually say the journey was made possible. This migration has been made possible by the help of the Spirit of God.
So the whole story of their journey, of their life, is
Yes.
rooted in this is what the Spirit of God is doing.
Yes. It's common for people to say, I got my visa by miracle because somebody prayed for it.
Right. Yeah.
Those stories are everywhere.
Yeah.
And that's their outlook. God is at work, and that's what has brought me here.
Right.
I hear them so many times. We are not here for the pound, and we're not here for this. Yes, we can come for education, we can come for other things, but the real reason that God has brought us here is for mission. So there is that sense of talking about God's urgency in even big things like migration.
Right.
That God is moving people from Africa, or moving people around for the sake of God's mission. God's urgency is there in their migration.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I see that, and it's a deeply beguiling and inviting way of life. I wonder whether you have any reflections on how well, I'll say this. For me, the notions of I'm called here by the Spirit as an agent of what God is up to ahead of us tends not to be the dominant narrative of the kind of the Euro-tribal churches.
Sure.
I wonder what your observations and learnings are about how those ways of Christian life that seem natural to African immigrants might be introduced into the ways of life of the Euro-tribal church.
Mm. Yeah, I believe that in the coming together of people from different parts of the world, Christians, we help one another see God better. We help one another understand God better. And so I'm really convinced that the presence of African Christians in the West is something that's helpful, that's good for Western Christianity as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I find interesting is really the fact that, for example, African Christians, they come in, they have a different worldview from Westerners, which could be helpful for mission, for theology, for other things in the West, but they struggle to communicate it to Westerners in a way that Westerners will. Right. So the good things about the Spirit become sort of freakish for Westerners. You're talking about the Spirit in a way that we don't find it understandable or understandable.
Yeah.
And yet the African is really saying that there's nothing I can do without the Spirit.
Yeah.
This is everything to me. But he's saying it in a way that Westerners find not that helpful.
Right.
And so it's learning how to communicate cross-culturally, both Westerners and Africans and other than Westerners, to communicate to each other in a way that makes communication possible. That we share the gifts that God has given us. Mm-hmm. There are gifts that the Western Church has for African Christians, and there are gifts that African Christians, Korean Christians, Latin American Christians bring to the table.
Yeah.
How do we talk to one another? And that I find the difficult question.
Well, I think you're, in one sense, naming a critical next steps, not the word I want to use, but if we raise the question of can the West be converted, or what, not even beyond that, if we raise the question of how do we join with what God is doing,
yes,
then part of the response is we need to learn how to listen to one another across racial, cultural differences, recognizing that in that mix is the ferment of the Spirit.
That's right. Yes.
Right. That's a wonderful gift and a way to frame perhaps some of the critical things that need to take place.
Sure.
What are those listening tables going to look like?
Yes.
Who hosts those listening tables?
Who holds the mic?
Who holds the mic?
That's right.
Yeah. That's extremely helpful.
Sure.
Really, really helpful.